running a 3PL is tricky from a financial point of view because you're totally beholden to how well your customers are doing with sales. And if you lose an anchor customer, you lose your biggest customer, you can go from having a really healthy Q1 and Q2 to having a bloody awful Q3 and Q4 because that big book of business has evaporated for you. So, and we've seen some events like that that have been highly publicized in the UK in the last 12 or 18 months.
Welcome to Chain Reaction, the podcast for the supply chain and logistics industry. If you enjoy this conversation, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode.
Welcome back to Chain Reaction Podcast. I'm Michael, CEO of Flox Logistics Marketplace. This is a podcast that brought to you by Flox as a way to engage with logistics and supply chain professionals and to explore the ideas, people, and innovations that are shaping our industry. Before we get started, please subscribe to the channel. It will help us grow and reach more people who value these conversations. Today I'm joined by Phil Rees, founder of Shipmax, a company that is focused on helping businesses improve the way they manage logistics and supply chains and shipping. So Phil, welcome. Great to have you here.
Afternoon, Michael. Thanks for the invite. Really pleased to be on with you.
Phil, as my typical kind of the conversation starter, I always like to begin with the people's kind of the origin stories, the journey behind the business. You've started Shipmax a few years ago, but you've been in logistics for a couple of decades now. So can you kind of walk us through a little bit of what has inspired you, or what accident happened that you got into logistics, and then what has inspired you to set up Shipmax?
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, rolling back 21 years, I was in my early to mid 20s, recently met my wife. At the time, home has always been Swansea for me in South Wales, but I was working in Cardiff and dating a girl in London. So and I didn't have a car. So we'd been dating for a little while. I'd been using a lot of buses and public transport and scrounging lifts and all of these kind of things. And at the time I worked in telesales, but I was doing telesales for kind of IT companies, mobile phone companies, those type of things. So Sarah and I, we'd been together a little while. We were looking to get our first mortgage. In fact, we got our first mortgage and we'd signed for a tiny little flat in Southfields in southwest London. And the day after we got the keys to the flat, I said, I'm quitting my job. She was like, are you crazy? I've done this to her a few times over the years. But I was like, look, I just can't get the bus anymore. I'm done with the bus. So we were due to go on holiday to Sardinia, and I said, when we get back from Sardinia, I'm telling them I'm leaving, and I'm gonna take the first job that offers me a company car. Because that way, I can get back and forth to Swansea without having to get the bus. And that first job happened to be with UK Mail, which was a spin-off of Business Post, a parcel delivery business in the UK. So Royal Mail had been deregulated and opened up for competition. So all of a sudden, alternative mail providers were able to access Royal Mail's last mile. Business Post had the warehousing and trunking infrastructure to be able to feed the Royal Mail inward mail centres. So yeah, the first company car that was made available to me was from a guy called Andrew Jameson. He's still with that business to this day and somebody who I keep in touch with. Great guy. Obviously, it's rebranded and changed hands a couple of times. It's now actually under Every's ownership. So kind of evolved from DHL eCommerce into Every. But yeah, that was it. I just needed some wheels, Michael, and UK Mail provided them, and I've stayed in the lane ever since.
So I appreciate that you kind of, it's an accidental. It's an interesting story. And yeah, it reminds me of a few things that happened to me as well. But this is not about this episode is not about me. But that's an interesting one. So having then fallen in love with, well, obviously your wife, and then with the business, with the logistics and the sector and industry, what has, let's call it, possessed you to set up a business yourself? And what is it? And what is Shipmax? What is it? What does it do?
Yeah, so listen, I'm a business development guy. That's always been the kind of common thread through all the roles I've had, prior to UK Mail and through to running Shipmax. And really today, business development is core to Shipmax's success. What we try and do is position Shipmax as an independent sort of source of truth, somewhere where a brand or a retailer can come for, market-wide agnostic advice about any elements of their supply chain that are giving them a headache. My career's taken me through the kind of, direct mail, printed mail, catalogs, and all of that sort of old school distribution. Back when I started, we used to refer to e-commerce as mail order, because that's kind of how it worked. People would receive catalogs, fill in forms, post business reply envelopes back to wherever the warehouse was, and that was how their order was fulfilled and shipped to them. So, lived through that whole internet disruption of the printed mail side of the industry taking an enormous nosedive and more or less drying up, but rising from its ashes has been the small parcel logistics business and what we've come to know as e-commerce. So, we touch all areas of a brand's supply chain. We can advise them on sourcing goods from factories in China and Asia all the way through to their small parcel returns. And whilst I'm not a technical guy per se, I've managed a lot of IT teams over the years and a lot of integration projects. So I'm quite comfortable talking about the software side of running an e-commerce business, as well as the kind of, the physical movement of the goods and the customs clearance and all the bits that we know need to come together and orchestrate in order for a brand or a retailer to have a strong end-to-end supply chain.
That's very interesting. I mean, so in the kind of in your years of kind of consulting and advisory work that you do, you've obviously came across many clients and many issues and many problems and many setups. So, what would you say that brands, manufacturers, or distributors typically or very frequently get wrong?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I do see common theme and pattern that cuts across that. Brands and retailers, they focus on product first, of course. They have to sell the thing that they make, and then they typically focus on marketing that thing that they make or that they supply. The supply chain's often a little bit of an afterthought. Actually, okay, we've got a great product. We know how we're going to market it to the consumer and where we're going to sell it. But then it's like, okay, we've got to move it around the world. We've got to get it to people quickly, and it's not the sexy side of it all. I always think it's the dusty, sort of dirty, grey-haired old man side of the industry, really. But it's often when you look at a direct-to-consumer business, let's say a straight-up online retailer, it's typically their second largest area of cost after the product itself. So, so planning for your supply chain and having that plan in place along with, the products you're going to sell and how you're going to market them, I think is an important leg of that stool, if you like, for an analogy.
Well, I have some background in consulting as well, and one of the things that I've seen clients kind of wrestle with is the dilemma, kind of on one end, the desire to have completed total control, which means have everything in house. Not necessarily the actual operations, but at least as much management, as much control, as much oversight and decision making in house. Versus the other extreme is our knowledge bench is very small and very narrow. We don't know a lot about the most sophisticated stuff that's going on. Why don't we outsource it to somebody who can take care of both the management and the risk side of it, and they will try to negotiate a nice open book contract, and they will do everything for us so we can keep our internal team very light. So what do you think? What do you think the problems with either of those thoughts, and what do you think the kind of the best setup is? Or there is no such thing as one size fits all. It's always kind of depending on the circumstances and the type of business.
Yeah, it's a broad question, and it does depend on the specifics of the brand and retailer and the specifics of the product. But I'm quite a big advocate for outsourcing. I think, running your own warehousing and managing all of that in your own sort of business. There's a lot of capex involved in all of that stuff, and it also comes with a lot of risk. Running a warehouse can be, warehouses are dangerous places, and if you're entering into that world without really understanding the health and safety requirements and obligations and all of those kind of things, then you really open yourself up to a lot of risk. So, the typical evolution of a brand is often, do everything yourself in the early days, maybe from your garage or your spare bedroom. We've seen so many stories of brands that now do billions of dollars in revenue that were started in a bedroom somewhere or in a big yellow self-storage. But I think once you get some traction, once carrying a rucksack full of parcels down to the post office every afternoon to make sure that you hit your delivery SLA becomes a little bit unwieldy and challenging, then that's the inflection point where you need to sort of think about, okay, are we going to go and lease some space and continue to do this ourselves, or are we going to just go and find a 3PL provider who can work with us on a partnership basis, but free us up to focus on the sales, the marketing, and the product. And probably, if I was going to say, when I'm advising early stage brands, I'm normally sort of shepherding them towards the outsourcing route rather than encouraging them to go and sign a 10-year lease on a building.
Mm. Now, of course, yeah, obviously, especially as a startup, you don't want to make a long-term commitment, because you don't know what shape your business is going to be. So, yeah, I'm completely with you in the camp of, yeah, providing kind of the outsourcing of logistics operations to professionals who know how to run the business. That is exactly, to a large extent, the ethos behind the Flocks as a marketplace platform. But the interesting point then, we have give or take 3,500 different businesses, the logistics service providers that claim to offer 3PL fulfillment, e-commerce, and so forth services. But not all of them are on the same level playing field, and there's a massive gaps between the good and the bad. So how would you differentiate between them? I mean, on the other hand, it is, I mean, if you really squint and look at this, it's quite a commoditized market. In a sense, the service is not, it's not a branded service. It's like, yeah, it's the fulfillment that has a certain set of SLAs that need to be met and certain level of professionalism, with a few exceptions. But how do you find the right one?
Well, that's the tricky bit, and that's really where a business like Shipmax can really add value to a brand or a retailer, because it's not straightforward. I've heard the number in the UK to be 3,500. I was actually with somebody recently that seemed to think it was more like 10 or even 15,000 businesses out there that offer some form of fulfillment, 3PL type services. Um, and within that, as you rightly say, there's good, bad, and ugly. But there's also quite a spectrum of sort of specialisms and also sizes as well. Like, it's no good a startup or an early stage brand going and banging on the door of an enterprise level provider, because they're just not going to engage with an early stage brand. Their setup is for established brands who have regular trade flows and are dealing in high volumes. So the first thing to look at is that alignment in terms of where the brand is on its journey relative to the size of the 3PL providers that we recommend they talk to. So that's one area. It's also about understanding, do they have the correct operational setup? For example, if all of their customers are direct to consumer Shopify brands, but you just need FBA preparation and fulfillment to Amazon warehouses, or all of your orders are coming through purchase orders and the stock's being shipped to retailers, then it's not a good fit, because it's a different specialism. And then you can even kind of drill down into the product specifics. There are specialists out there for dangerous goods. There are specialists out there for large format items like sofas and furniture. If you're an internationally focused brand with one stock pool in the UK, then you might want to consider working with a bonded warehouse provider so that you're not doubling up on duty and tax when you look at your supply chain end to end. So one of the things that we do very early on in the conversation with a brand is we do a really deep dive into where they're at now, what good looks like for them, what their future expansion plans are, and also, what products they're selling, where they're selling them, how they're selling them, and make sure that we're aligning them to 3PL providers that have experience in those areas, not pushing them towards somebody where they're going to be that provider's kind of first rodeo, for want of a better description.
Mm. Well, you by the sound of this, so obviously your client, your paying clients are the shippers themselves, right?
No, it's actually the
Um,
other way around. So,
oh, is it? Okay,
yeah, I mean, it's probably worth me sort of explaining. So
please.
I never envisaged being the 3PL guy in the UK, right? It's why when you have a look at my logo, you're going to see a parcel rather than a warehouse, because that was really more my wheelhouse in my earlier career. I did build a 3PL operation for my former employer, and we took an empty warehouse and managed to fill it with customers. So I have some experience of implementing a warehouse management system and building a team and a customer base for a 3PL. But it was a pattern that just emerged in the business. The single, the question that we were asked to help brands with more often than any other was, "Hey Phil, we need to find a new warehouse partner." That really kind of, I suppose, got some extra velocity last year with, God bless him, Mr. Trump, the leader of the free world over in the US. When he introduced his tariffs and did away with the $800 de minimis, all of a sudden overseas brands were scrambling to get stock on the ground in the US, and we were seeing lots and lots of those opportunities coming through. And then inevitably, through being a regular supply of opportunities to some US warehousing businesses, they started reciprocating and saying, "Hey Phil, we've got these American brands that would love to have some stock on the ground in the UK or Europe. Can you help them find a home?" And so that kind of was where this whole kind of network of 3PL partners emerged from. So I then started studying the introducer space. We're not the only horse in the race when it comes to introducing brands to 3PL partners. But when I looked at the competitive landscape, I really didn't like what I was seeing, because there didn't seem to be any due diligence there. Like, nobody was really checking what the brands really need. Nobody was checking the SLAs or the quality of the 3PLs. If you in most of our competitors, if you've got a couple of hours in an afternoon and a credit card and a bit of warehouse space, you can get listed on these platforms and be there waving to the world saying, "Hey, come and talk to us," but nobody's really checking if you're any good at it or not. And a key thing, I've been the guy over the years that when 3PLs get into financial trouble, I'm often the person that people ring to say, "Oh my God, we've had this awful notification from our 3PL to say they're going into administration. We've got, 240 pallets of stock in their warehouse." The 3PL, when that happens, will always leave it to the 11th hour to tell the brands that they're working with that it's happening, because they don't want to spook them. And so, what often happens is the brand find out on a Friday, and they're then trying to get their stock out by the following Monday morning, because that's when the administrator is going to step in and it's all going to get wrapped up in complications. So we also run Experian Business Express across our entire network. So we're not just credit checking them when we onboard them, but we're also at regular kind of timestamps, checking in on their financial health, because running a 3PL is tricky from a financial point of view, because you're totally beholden to how well your customers are doing with sales. And if you lose an anchor customer, you lose your biggest customer, you can go from having a really healthy Q1 and Q2 to having a bloody awful Q3 and Q4, because that big book of business has evaporated for you. So, and we've seen some events like that have been highly publicized in the UK in the last 12 or 18 months. So yeah, I just kind of decided that there was something there that needed to be disrupted a little bit. So we're not about scale here. We're not trying to build the biggest network of 3PL partners. What we would far rather have is a much smaller network of partners who we know are a safe pair of hands for the brands that we introduce. And it's a really clean commercial model because as a middleman in inverted commas, which is what people might perceive Shipmax to be, the first question a brand is going to have is, okay, well, if Phil Rees and his team help us find a 3PL partner, then surely they're going to be taking a big percentage of that contract in commission. So a big differentiator for us is that we never take commission on the deals that we instigate between 3PLs and brands. The commercial model is simple. The 3PLs that we provide opportunities to on a regular basis pay us a subscription each month for us providing relevant opportunities to them on a regular basis. That's it. No commissions, no affiliate fees. So we can go into that process with a brand, and that brand can be fully confident that whatever the outcome, they're going to get the best possible commercial deal struck between them and the 3PL, and every penny of that contract will be spent between those two parties. None of it will be flowing back to us.
You are listening to Chain Reaction. This podcast is brought to you by Phlox, the leading marketplace for the supply chain and logistics industry. Visit phlox.is to find out how you find the perfect supplier or make your services available to prospective buyers. Thanks for tuning in. Now back to the show.
So when you mentioned a couple of times, obviously, kind of the reliability of the partners and the vetting. So how does your vetting process work? So how are you having, I don't know, boots on the ground, effectively walking and talking to people? So what's
Yeah, those boots on the ground tend to be mine. So we, it was interesting because, having been around this world for 20 odd years, I had a lot of senior senior friends in some of the larger fulfillment businesses in the UK. So the first sign-ups of partners were people who I knew, who trusted me, who knew that I'd deliver, good contracts for them. They were also people who I'd already referred brands into, so I knew they were good for their SLAs, and it wasn't just the salespeople telling me they were good at what they did. I had some data to support it. And then everybody else that we work with has either come to us highly recommended from a brand who we're close to, or, they offer something different into the mix that we don't already have in the network. So it's kind of by invitation only. You'll never once see me posting on LinkedIn saying, hey, if you're a 3PL, come and talk to me about joining my network. That's not how we do it. We only want to work with the best in class providers. So as part of the onboarding process, I physically visit them at one of their locations. I walk the warehouse floor. I don't wear white gloves, but I do run my finger along the racking just to see if it's clean or dirty. I take careful attention to their approach to health and safety. If they invite me into the warehouse and they don't offer me a high-vis vest or ask me to put my safety boots on, that's a bit of a red flag for me, because you can pretty much, correlate the fact that if they take excuse me, a fairly relaxed attitude to health and safety within their premises, then they're probably taking a relaxed attitude towards their customer SLAs and other things that kind of tally into that. And then as part of those meetings, we'll also do a really deep dive into the ideal customer profile of that 3PL business. So we'll look at what sort of brands they work with, if they have any specialisms, and make sure then that when we have brands approaching us for the support, that we know that where we're suggesting they might want to engage, that these guys have already got experience of working in their sector. And then obviously there's the Experian credit checking and various other things that we do. So yeah, it's a big part of what we do, and it's something that we'll never overlook. I mean, I've done, since actually kind of taking this to market in November of last year, I think I've done about 25,000 miles up and down the UK. Our network goes from Newcastle, is about the furthest north where we have a warehouse, down to Plymouth, across to Kent, and furthest west is in Pembroke Dock in South Wales, and then there's plenty up and around the Midlands. So yeah, I've been to Newcastle twice, God knows how many times to Birmingham, Coventry, Rugby, and all of those places. But you know, it's a step in the process that I never fast forward through. You know, because you know, for me, that visual check around the warehouse and seeing which warehouse management system they're utilizing and how they're utilizing it and how the stock's organized. You know, if it looks messy and untidy and there's shrink wrap down the aisles and pallets looking like they're not where they're meant to be and all of that kind of thing, then all of those things are the sort of things that I'm looking out for, just because they're big red flags, you know.
And kind of yeah, the big red flags are small indicators which actually kind of together create or paint a good picture. Well, we talked about sort of the supply side of things of the equation, but if we look at kind of the demand side, the customers, what are the typical questions the shippers or the retailers are coming to you with? Is that cost? Is that service level? Is that expansion? Is that
It's kind of all of those things, you know. Often it's triggered by an underperforming provider. So, you know, maybe they've had a bumpy ride over the last few months and that's causing them to have a look at, you know, reviewing whether they're in the right place. International expansion for sure. Brands coming to the UK for the first time, or brands looking to hold stock outside of the UK for the first time. I mean, what we saw last year with Mr. Trump and the tariffs, we're now going to see that same surge of activity looking across the French Channel towards Europe because of the removal of the European de minimis that took effect yesterday. So yeah, there's a number of different ways. Just yesterday, I was in the Cornwall area with a brand who sell pet supplies, and you know they've outgrown where they are today. It was a perfectly, you know, good contract for them for the 4 or 5 years that they've been trading with this particular partner. But this particular brand are growing 25 or 15 to 25% year on year. They're by far and away the provider's single biggest individual customer, and they're just not seeing the level of kind of attention and care and also the kind of future plan for expansion that aligns to their own growth plans. So they're now looking for something, or beginning the journey of looking to something towards something that's a bit bigger and a bit more sophisticated. So that was kind of that's more of a project-based piece of consultancy where they're planning to go out to tender most likely next year, and they wanted to really understand deeply what the UK 3PL landscape looks like and how you know which providers they should be inviting to tender, and looking at, you know, kind of what good looks like for them commercially with the numbers that they have and the SKU range that they have and all of that kind of thing. So yeah, it can be a number of different reasons why they're looking, but we try and help them all. You know, from the first founder with their first stock arriving. You know, I spoke to one young lady who was a textiles graduate from Bristol University who'd done her entire 3 years at university living with mum and dad, saved up all her student loan money, lived really frugally, and she'd invested all of those funds into you know, a brand of t-shirts and hoodies and garments that she was extremely proud of. But there was real intent there. You know, where we have to be careful is that we're not just, you know, allocating time to helping people with fanciful ideas who haven't really got any you know, any kind of impetus behind them. But for me, this young lady, you know, she'd committed her own money to produce this stock. There was a containerized shipment on its way to somewhere in the UK, and we've helped her to find a local hero, small warehouse provider not too far away from where she was in Bristol. And she's absolutely over the moon because she just couldn't find those people by Google searching or using AI tools, because you know those local heroes, they don't have the budgets and the ad spend to feature highly in a Google search. So yeah, it's a real kind of what's the word, like spectrum is probably the best way to describe it. But you know, we we've worked with some big brands. I mean, the biggest brand that we've worked with in the 7 months of doing this is a confectionery brand that turn over 250 million worldwide. For them, ambient storage was absolutely fine in the UK for 340 days of the year. And then we have these temperature spikes that occur for a couple of weeks where all of a sudden ambient storage is not appropriate for their chocolate products one bit. So you know, they came to us because they'd experienced a lot of pain when the UK heat waves arrive, and needed to change to a provider that could maintain temperature regardless of what the weather's doing. So they're about the biggest ones so far, but we've also worked with some fairly significant American brands. One who was serving direct to consumer from the States, but seeing enormous demand for their product in the UK, and then kind of natural next step was to bring inventory across. And then a couple of large Shopify brands in the sort of 35 to 50 million range as well, and then all the way down to that young lady from Bristol who had no previous, but something that she'd gone all in on as a founder. I I have a bit of a soft spot for people who kind of take these big steps in business and back themselves. So, when somebody kind of gives me that type of origin story, I can't help but want to add some value and support them, even if I've got to be quickly in and out of that engagement, because I've been there myself. I did it. I put everything I had on the line to launch Shipmax. So when I see somebody else making that move, I tend to have a bit of an affection for them.
I know what you mean, and I know exactly what you mean. I know exactly what that feels like. Um, One of the things, so you mentioned AI and you mentioned technology, and this is also one of the things that you mentioned before. So the Shipmax is as an AI native business, so it is kind of the matchmaking side of things, and this is what kind of Flux is for as well. So this is very, very interesting. Exactly, kind of how you address that space. How do you leverage AI? To what end do you leverage AI? What does AI do to you? To some people, it helps writing emails, which is a very, very basic use of AI. To some others, it's like extremely complicated agentic systems that are managing, I don't know, shipments and intelligence and the rest of it. It's like where are you on that spectrum, and specifically, what are the AI based kind of applications or the elements of your business that you have?
Yeah, good question. I'm not going to stand here and say to you that we're at the super advanced end of that spectrum. I'd say we're probably ahead of many other businesses, but we're still very much learning ourselves. I was quite an early adopter with ChatGPT. I kind of got sucked into the hype when it first launched back in, I think it was 2021 or 2022. At the time, I was working in employment for my previous employer, and I had a large tender document on my desk, and there was a number of questions in that tender that I didn't really know how to answer. So I signed up for a free chat GPT account and started pumping these questions into it, and my eyes widened, and I've been kind of hooked on it all ever since. I founded Shipmax in October 2023. At this point, I was already using meeting note takers. I was using a number of different LLMs and finding smart ways to get work done, with less of a heavy lift than had been available to me previously. The Today we're in a different space. We are building agentic based systems using primarily Claude Code and Codex and those sorts of programs. And I was very, very fortunate and lucky recently to be invited by Business Wales. I've been a coach and a mentor on the Business Wales Accelerated Growth Program for about 2 years. And they have a long-standing relationship with MIT in Boston, Massachusetts, through something called the Industrial Liaison Program. So myself and an intern that I was working with from University Trinity St. David here, who's now become my digital operations manager full-time working for the business. We were invited over to MIT's AI Summit back in April. Spent 3 days on campus attending the seminars and doing classroom sessions with the MIT alumni, looking at how they're using AI across all the various different businesses that they're involved with. And that again was massive learning experience. But what it kind of crystallized for me is that until you've got your data in really good shape, you're quite limited with what you can do with these tools, you know. So what it really prompted us was to kind of tear Shipmax apart and start building it back up from the foundational level. So we're building a database at the moment that kind of will orchestrate all of the AI tools that we use, and pulling the data in from various different sources. I mean, in Shipmax is a business that's, you know, primarily operating in the B2B space. Emails and phone numbers are probably the two most interesting data points that we hold. I mean, obviously we've got note taker transcripts and various other things. But for me, like the really important data to be able to leverage is those emails and phone numbers. But like any other business, that data was really spread out. So, you know, some of it was in my phone, a lot of it was in my email client. We had a fair chunk of it in the CRM system. There's also a massive pool of data linked to our LinkedIn accounts. So, over the last sort of 4 or 5 weeks, I've been running a Claude Cowork project to pull all of that data together and standardize it in a way that we can put it into our database, and then we can really start getting clever and sophisticated with, you know, outreach and intent signals and lots of other things. I'm not going to give all my secrets away on your podcast, but suffice to say, you know, we're learning a lot, and we're experimenting a lot, and really starting to see some really interesting results. So it's a part of the industry that I follow really, really closely. I mean, my day-to-day work hasn't changed much. You know, it's about speaking to clients, it's about developing partnerships, it's about, you know, building rapport and trust on the supply side and on the brand side. And you know, and actually, the, you know, the work hasn't changed much. What has changed, probably 10x to what it was 5 years ago, is how much work I can get through between a Monday and a Friday. Because I leverage a lot of productivity tools that mean that, you know, I'm able to output an awful lot more than I ever could before these tools were made available to me. I've always been a hard worker. I love what I do. You know, there's a phrase, isn't there, that if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. And I'm very fortunate that I do love what I do. But I'm now able to do an awful lot more of it at a much greater scale, because I'm making use of a lot of these things across the business and across my day-to-day work.
Right. No, 100%, 100%. The AI kind of the toolkit is exactly that, exactly what we look at it as well, is it's a massive productivity enhancer. It's not a replacement of people. We have coders that are using AI, but it's not a replacement of coders. It's like you still have to have expertise, which AI helps you leverage, helps you enhance, and helps you stretch much further. But we've explored a lot of interesting opportunities and challenges that are facing logistics industry. But the one question that I want, I ask every guest that I have on the podcast is, imagine you had a magic wand and you can wave it and instantly solve one problem in the business. That is that you continue to face, or your client continue to face, that is kind of gripping, or making, creating challenges for the business. So what would that be?
Oh, that's a tough one, Mike. Um, I think, you know, we, as an industry, we need to come together, you know, much better to, I think, look at how what we do impacts the planet that we all live on. You know, whether you're producing goods in factories or moving goods around, you know, we only have one Earth, right? And if we screw it up completely, then, you know, we're all cooked. So, you know, I think, yeah, if I could wave a magic wand to do one thing, it would be to, you know, to get the diesel fumes and the pollution and all of those things out of the equation. Because I think, you know, we all like to consume, we all like to have nice things. You know, none of us want to live in a cave and cook our meat over a fire, and, you know, sleep amongst the bugs and the creepy crawlies. So I don't think consumerism is going to go away, but I think we all need to be conscious of our impact on the planet from our business operations. And listen, you know, AI data centers consume an awful lot of energy. So, yeah, I don't know if that's a good enough answer to the question, but I think it's a pertinent one, and yeah, I think and a lot of businesses are really innovating. We're seeing electrified fleets, new warehouses being, totally kind of energy neutral, and all of these kind of things. So I think there's a lot of good work already going on. But I think as an industry, we need to really double down on that and place more investment and more R&D research into how we can do things. I mean, at MIT are doing some amazing work in that space. I mean, they showed us some presentations around a new engineering system that they built, which is designed to generate per kilowatt hour the lowest cost electricity that the planet's ever seen. And it, from an engineering point of view, and I'm going to do a really bad job of describing this, but I'll do my best. Imagine a big metal structure that looks like a football, but the size of, a 50-story building. It floats in the sea, rocks around like that. Below that, you've got a kind of inverted traffic cone sort of shape of a metal structure that goes down beneath the waves. And at the bottom, there's this thing that's probably the size of like 6 double-decker buses that stabilizes it. And it just sits in the water and rocks around, and that kinetic energy that it creates generates electricity. And the really interesting bit of that was that right at the last minute, as they're kind of getting to the end of the R&D and actually putting these things into production, someone said, well, why don't you put an AI data center in that metal void that you have at the bottom of this thing? Because not only is it going to be able to process AI data, but it's going to keep itself cool, because they were planning to launch these things around Alaska and all of these places where the seawater is really, really cold. So yeah, I love those sorts of innovations, that really move the needle on things. And yeah, I'm some of the stuff that MIT were doing with their AI projects is like way above my pay grade, and looking at sort of solving diseases with genetic modeling and forecasting and stuff like that. But to be exposed to the art of the possible and some of the amazing science that's coming out of that place was something that I yeah, it was just mind blowing for us. And but also, we came away with it with a lot from that trip, with a lot of useful kind of principles that we can deploy back into Shipmax, and we're busy trying to build and do that work as we speak.
Mm. No, thanks. Yeah, and yeah, I'm sure there is some hope for the species.
I hope so.
uh,
If
Thank
not,
you.
we'll need to follow Elon Musk to Mars and go and wreck that
Well,
planet instead.
yeah, exactly. Or just crumble into dust, exactly, and the planet will be done with us, and it might do dinosaurs again. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
so thank you, Phil, for joining the conversation. Thank you for sharing your experience and insights, and thank you for sharing your background and your thoughts about where the industry is going, and learning obviously about your journey and what you do at Shipmax. And to everyone watching and listening, thank you again for staying with us. I hope you find that episode valuable and interesting, and I look forward to welcoming you again in the next episode of Chain Reaction Podcast. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Mike.
Phil.
Thanks for tuning in to Chain Reaction. We hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you have a story or insights to share from your sector, we'd love to hear from you. Simply reach out to us through the links in the description. See you next time.